The fork hit the tray with a sharp, metallic crack, loud enough to cut through the low hum of the cabin, and the woman standing over him didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just stared down at the man in the aisle seat like he had just asked for something unreasonable, something offensive, something he had no right to want. "That's what you're getting," she said, her voice flat, controlled, final. "We're done here." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't move the tray away. He simply looked at the food, then up at her face. His eyes were steady. Too steady. The kind of calm that made people uneasy without knowing why. Around them, the first-class cabin went quiet in that particular way people get quiet when they sense trouble but don't yet know which direction it will break. Somewhere behind them, a glass clinked. Someone cleared their throat. The engines outside the fuselage kept their steady roar, indifferent to human tension. Michael Carter had been underestimated his entire life. At 62, his body carried the quiet wear of decades spent moving through boardrooms, courtrooms, loading docks, and red-eye flights. His hair was more grey than black now, cropped short, practical. His hands were large, rougher than people expected from a man who owned companies instead of tools. He wore a dark canvas jacket, faded at the seams, and comfortable shoes meant for walking, not impressing. Nothing about him signaled power. Everything about him suggested someone you could dismiss without consequence. Linda Walsh had built a career on that instinct. She stood rigid in the aisle, shoulders squared beneath her Navy uniform, posture sharpened by 27 years of seniority and a reputation for keeping order. At 55, she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how far she could push before anyone pushed back. Her smile, when she used it, was precise. Her silence, when she chose it, was a weapon. Right now, she wasn't smiling. She was watching Michael the way a security camera watches a shadow move across a restricted area. "You asked, I answered," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound professional, not kind. "If you don't like it, you're free to file a complaint after we land." Michael inhaled slowly through his nose. The air smelled faintly of coffee, recycled oxygen, and polished plastic. He could hear his own breath. He could hear the soft rustle of fabric as the man across the aisle shifted in his seat, suddenly very interested in the window. Michael thought of the last time someone had told him to wait his turn. It had been in a courthouse in Ohio, 30 years earlier, when a judge with tired eyes had told him patience would be rewarded. It had been. Eventually. He glanced down the aisle. A few rows ahead, a man in a tailored grey suit was laughing quietly with another flight attendant, a glass of amber liquid resting comfortably in his hand. The man hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't even looked uncomfortable. Everything about the scene was effortless, earned in Linda's mind. Michael's jaw tightened just slightly, not in anger, in recognition. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking beneath his weight. "I ordered the vegetarian meal," he said calmly. "I confirmed it twice. It's in your system." Linda's lips pressed together. Her eyes flicked, quick and sharp, toward the galley, then back to him. "We ran out. You served one 10 minutes ago." That was a different situation. The words hung there, heavy with implication. Different situation. Different kind of passenger. Different set of rules. A woman 2 rows back glanced up, her eyebrows knitting together. Her husband leaned closer to her, whispering something Michael couldn't hear. A younger flight attendant near the galley doorway froze, fingers clenched around a stack of napkins, her face pale. She had seen this before. Everyone had. Michael nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said. Linda straightened, clearly satisfied. She slid the tray an inch closer to him, a small, deliberate shove. "Enjoy your meal." Then she turned on her heel and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the aisle floor. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Michael didn't touch the food. He watched her go, watched the way her shoulders relaxed as she returned to her domain near the front of the cabin, watched the way the other crew members avoided his eyes. He felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not pain, not sadness, but something older, something patient. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly, white and cold, like an untouched field. Inside the cabin, the temperature felt wrong, too tight, too quiet. Across the aisle, the man in the grey suit finally looked at Michael. Their eyes met for half a second. The man smirked, just barely, then turned away, lifting his glass in a casual, unconscious gesture of victory. Michael exhaled. He reached into the worn leather bag at his feet and pulled out his phone. The screen lit his face with a soft blue glow. No dramatic gestures, no anger, just movement, purpose. He scrolled through unread messages, past reminders and travel alerts, until he found the thread he was looking for, the one marked confidential, the one that hadn't technically gone live yet. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. The cabin jolted. A few passengers gasped. The seatbelt sign chimed on with a dull, authoritative ping. Somewhere, a baby began to cry. Linda grabbed an overhead rail, steadying herself, her expression briefly betraying irritation. Control mattered to her. Order mattered. She glanced back down the aisle, her eyes landing on Michael again. He was still calm, still unmoving, still looking at his phone like none of this concerned him. She frowned. In the galley, the younger flight attendant swallowed hard, her heart racing. She had watched the exchange from the start. She had seen the confirmation on the screen earlier. She knew the meal existed. She also knew better than to speak. People like Linda didn't forget. People like Linda kept score. Michael's thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't type yet. He listened. The engines, the murmurs, the tension coiled like a wire pulled too tight. He wondered, briefly, how many other people on this flight carried their own private calculations. How many had learned, over years, when to stay quiet and when to stand firm. He locked the phone and slipped it back into his bag. Not yet. The story wasn't ready to move forward. But it would. The seatbelt sign stayed lit longer than it should have, a thin orange warning glowing above the aisle like an unblinking eye. The turbulence passed, but the tension didn't. It settled instead, low and heavy, spreading through the cabin the way smoke fills a room long before anyone smells it. Linda Walsh returned to her station near the galley and planted herself there, arms folded loosely, chin lifted. From a distance, she looked composed, in control. Up close, the tightness around her mouth told a different story. She didn't like loose ends. She didn't like passengers who didn't react the way they were supposed to. Michael Carter was supposed to complain, or sulk, or apologize. He was supposed to do something that fit inside the small box she had already built for him. He did none of it. Michael sat still, hands resting on his thighs, eyes unfocused but alert. He listened. He always listened first. He had learned that in places where the loudest voice usually lost. The man in the grey suit laughed again, louder this time, leaning toward the flight attendant who had refilled his glass without being asked. The sound carried. It wasn't cruel. It was careless. That was worse. 2 rows back, the older woman finally spoke. "That doesn't seem right," she said softly, her voice edged with disbelief. She wasn't addressing anyone in particular. Her husband shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing toward Linda, then back at Michael. "Maybe they made a mistake," he murmured, though even he didn't sound convinced. The younger flight attendant in the galley, Emily Brooks, felt her pulse thudding in her throat. 32 years old, 5 years flying. Enough time to know exactly when a situation was sliding towards something dangerous. She adjusted her grip on the coffee pot, knuckles whitening, and glanced at the service tablet mounted to the wall. The order was still there. The vegetarian meal, confirmed, highlighted in green. Untouched. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, Linda was watching her. Emily straightened immediately, forcing her shoulders back. Linda didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The message passed between them without words. Stay in your lane. Do your job. Forget what you saw. Emily nodded, a reflex she hated, and turned away. Michael noticed. Of course he did. He noticed the way Emily's hands shook just slightly as she poured coffee for another passenger. The way her eyes kept darting toward the tablet, then away. The way she avoided Linda's gaze when she thought no one was looking. Michael had seen that look before. On junior associates asked to falsify reports. On warehouse supervisors told to look the other way. On people caught between a paycheck and a conscience. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded boarding document, smoothing it carefully on his knee. The paper was creased from travel, edges softened by use. He read it again, though he already knew every detail by heart. Not because he doubted himself, because patience was a discipline. Linda took a breath and turned, her heels clicking as she walked down the aisle again. This time, her smile was back. Polished. Public. She stopped beside Michael's seat, just long enough for others to notice. "Sir," she said, loud enough to carry, "is everything all right here?" Michael looked up at her slowly. His eyes were calm, curious, almost kind. "No," he said simply. The word landed harder than any accusation. Linda's smile stiffened. "I'm sorry to hear that," she replied. "As I explained earlier, we're unable to accommodate your request at this time." Michael tilted his head slightly. "You explained that you chose not to." A ripple moved through the cabin. A man across the aisle leaned forward. Someone shifted in their seat. Linda felt the attention turn, felt it like a draft against her skin. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice again, "I'm going to ask you to lower your tone." Michael didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "I'm speaking normally," he replied. "I paid for a service. I confirmed it. You gave it to someone else." "That's not accurate." "It is." For a moment, neither of them moved. The engines roared steadily outside, a constant reminder that no one here was going anywhere. Linda's jaw tightened. She glanced toward the cockpit door, then back at Michael. "If you continue to disrupt service," she said, "I'll have to involve the captain." Michael nodded once. "That's your right." The ease with which he said it unsettled her. She turned sharply and walked toward the cockpit, her steps quick, purposeful. As she disappeared behind the reinforced door, a murmur swept through the cabin. Voices rose, then fell again. The man in the grey suit leaned back, crossing his arms, watching with thinly veiled amusement. Emily felt her stomach drop. The cockpit door opened a few moments later. Captain Thomas Reed stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate, his expression already weary. 60 years old, 32 years flying. He had seen every kind of passenger, every kind of complaint. He had learned, over time, which ones mattered. Linda spoke first, her voice quick, clipped, controlled. "He's being difficult," she said, gesturing toward Michael. "Refusing to accept the service limitations." Captain Reed's eyes moved to Michael. He took him in. The jacket, the shoes, the posture. He didn't see a threat. He didn't see a VIP. He saw a situation that needed to end before it spread. "Sir," Reed said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm Captain Reed. What seems to be the problem?" Michael met his gaze. "Your crew reassigned a meal I pre-ordered, and then told me it didn't exist." Reed frowned slightly. "Linda?" Linda didn't hesitate. "We had an unexpected shortage." Emily felt something snap inside her chest. Reed considered this, then nodded. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're mid-flight. I'm not making changes in the air. If you'd like to file a formal complaint when we land, that process is available to you. Michael studied him for a long moment. He saw the calculation behind the captain's eyes. Minimize, de-escalate, protect the system. It was familiar. He respected it. He also knew its limits. I understand, Michael said. I'll do that. Reed relaxed slightly, already turning away. Thank you. But Michael wasn't finished. One more thing, he added. Reed paused. When you do review the complaint, Michael continued evenly, you may want to look at prior reports involving this crew. Patterns tend to repeat. Silence. Reed's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He gave a short nod. Noted. Linda's eyes flashed. The captain returned to the cockpit. Linda stayed where she was, staring down at Michael, something brittle in her expression now. We're done, she said under her breath. Michael watched her walk away. Around him, the cabin slowly exhaled. Conversations resumed, quieter now. The man in the grey suit shook his head, smirking. The older woman, 2 rows back, leaned toward her husband. That man was right, she whispered. Emily stood frozen in the galley, heart pounding, her mind racing. She knew what she had just witnessed. She also knew what it meant to be the only one who could prove it. Michael leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The plane surged forward, steady and relentless. He felt the weight of the moment settle, not as anger, but as resolve. The structure was showing its cracks, and he hadn't even touched it yet. The cabin lights dimmed to a muted amber, the kind meant to signal calm while masking fatigue. Outside the windows, the sky darkened into a deep, endless blue. Time stretched, space compressed. The plane moved forward, but inside, everything felt suspended, like a held breath that refused to release. Michael Carter opened his eyes. Linda Walsh stood at the front of the cabin, speaking quietly into the interphone, her back straight, her voice low and measured. From where Michael sat, he couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He recognized the cadence. Damage control, framing the narrative before anyone else could. She had done this for decades, long enough to believe it always worked. Across the aisle, Richard Bowen shifted in his seat, glancing toward the galley, then back toward Michael. His smile was gone now, replaced by something closer to curiosity. He took a sip of his drink, slower this time, as if savoring it meant something different than it had 10 minutes earlier. The older couple behind Michael spoke in hushed tones. The woman leaned forward, peering past the seats. I've flown this route for 20 years, she whispered. Never seen it handled like that. Her husband nodded, jaw tight, hands folded carefully in his lap. He didn't like conflict. He liked fairness even less when it was missing. Emily Brooks stood near the galley entrance, pretending to rearrange cups that didn't need rearranging. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal panel. She looked younger than she felt, tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Her thoughts ran in circles, each one landing on the same uncomfortable truth. This wasn't an accident. She remembered the training videos, the policies, the emphasis on consistency. She remembered the line drilled into them from day one. Treat every passenger the same. No shortcuts, no favorites, no assumptions. She had believed it then. She wanted to believe it now. Linda turned from the interphone and caught Emily's eye again. Emily froze. Linda walked toward her, heels clicking softly, expression neutral. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Make sure the cabin stays calm, she said. We don't need this spreading. Emily nodded. Yes, ma'am. Linda lingered for a moment, her gaze sharp, assessing. Then she moved on. Emily exhaled shakily and glanced down the aisle toward Michael. He wasn't watching her. He was staring out the window, his face reflected faintly in the glass, features softened by the dark. There was no anger there, no outrage, just focus. That scared her more than shouting would have. Michael rested his forehead lightly against the cool window. Far below, scattered lights marked towns and highways, tiny grids of life continuing without them. He thought about the last time he had been in a position like this, not on a plane, in a courtroom. He had been younger then, angrier, certain that being right would be enough. It hadn't been. He had learned since then that systems didn't break from confrontation, they broke from exposure, slowly, methodically, in front of witnesses. He reached into his bag again, this time pulling out a slim folder, plain, unmarked. He flipped it open just enough to confirm what he already knew. Names, dates, internal memos printed on cheap paper, complaints, patterns. He closed it carefully and slid it back inside. Across the aisle, Richard leaned toward the man next to him and muttered something Michael couldn't hear. The other man shrugged, clearly uninterested in getting involved. Richard laughed softly, but the sound lacked confidence. A sudden chime echoed through the cabin as the captain's voice came over the speaker, smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. We expect a smooth ride for the remainder of the flight. Thank you for your patience." The words felt ironic. Linda resumed moving through the cabin, checking seatbelts, offering polite smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she reached Richard, her warmth returned fully. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm briefly, conspiratorially. The contrast was unmistakable now, not just to Michael, to others. The older woman behind him clicked her tongue quietly. "Unbelievable," she murmured. Michael heard it. He didn't turn around. Emily watched the exchange from the galley, her chest tightening. She stepped forward, then stopped herself. Her heart pounded. She imagined herself speaking up, correcting Linda, handing Michael the meal that still sat untouched in the warming drawer. She imagined the look on Linda's face, the consequences. Her hand trembled. Linda's voice cut through the air. "Emily?" Emily looked up instantly. "Yes?" "Bring the checklists forward," Linda said. "I want everything documented." Emily nodded and moved, her legs heavy. As she passed Michael's row, she felt his presence like gravity. He glanced at her, just briefly. Their eyes met. His expression wasn't accusatory. It wasn't demanding. It was understanding. Something inside Emily cracked. She stopped. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, barely louder than a whisper. Linda turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Emily swallowed. Her throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "I said, I'm sorry, sir," she added, looking at Michael. The cabin seemed to tilt. Linda's face hardened. "Emily," she said, warning threaded through her tone. "That's enough." Michael spoke before Emily could. His voice was calm, measured, steady. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "You didn't make the choice." Linda stared at him. "Sir, I need you to stop engaging my crew." Michael held her gaze. "Then stop putting them in impossible positions." The words landed with a dull thud. Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. Linda straightened, her composure finally cracking at the edges. "Captain Reed will be informed," she said, her voice tight. "Again." Michael nodded. As he should be. She turned and walked away, faster now, her authority strained. Emily stood frozen, heart racing, realizing what she had just done. Around her, passengers stared openly. The older couple, a man near the window, shaking his head slowly. Richard Bowen, no longer smiling. Michael leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes again. The tension in the cabin buzzed like static. He could feel it building, layer by layer, witness by witness. He knew this phase well. The system always resisted first, but resistance left fingerprints, and fingerprints told stories no one could erase. The sound came first. Not loud, not sharp, just wrong. A low buzz rippled through the cabin as the interphone clicked on and off twice, like someone testing the line and thinking better of it. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. People sensed a shift, the way animals do before a storm. Linda Walsh stood near the forward bulkhead, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face had settled into something harder now. The practiced hospitality was gone. What remained was authority stripped of warmth. She had crossed an internal line, and she knew it. Captain Reed emerged from the cockpit again. This time, he didn't look annoyed. He looked alert. He scanned the cabin, not as a pilot scanning instruments, but as a man reading a room. He noticed the older couple leaning forward. The man 2 rows back with his phone held low, screen glowing. Emily, standing rigid near the galley, eyes fixed on the floor. And finally, Michael Carter, sitting still, hands folded, posture relaxed, but unmistakably present. Reed stopped beside Linda. She leaned in and spoke quietly, fast, her words clipped. Michael didn't need to hear them. He could see the shape of them in her mouth. Disruption, non-compliance, crew interference. Reed nodded once, slowly. He stepped into the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but firmer than before. "I need to address a service concern so we can move forward smoothly. I appreciate everyone's patience." No one spoke. He turned toward Michael. "Sir," Reed said, "I'm going to ask you again to refrain from further interaction with the crew. We're in a controlled environment, and escalation benefits no one." Michael looked up at him. His expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. "With respect," Michael said evenly, "I haven't escalated anything. I asked a question. I was denied an answer. That's not disruption. That's documentation." The word hung there. Documentation. Reed's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, this is not the time." "When is?" Michael asked quietly. A murmur rippled through the cabin. The older woman behind him spoke again, louder this time. "He's not wrong," she said. Her husband put a hand on her arm, but she didn't stop. "You can't just take something someone paid for and pretend it didn't happen." Reed glanced back at her, then forward again. His authority felt thinner now, stretched across too many eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm not discussing this with the entire cabin." "You already are," she replied. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. Linda shifted beside him. "Captain," she said, "we're wasting time." Reed nodded. He made a decision. Not the right one, the fast one. "Sir," he said to Michael, "if you continue to challenge crew decisions, I will have to note this as interference. That can carry consequences." Michael absorbed the words without reacting. He had heard variations of them before, in factories, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, language designed to intimidate without threatening. He leaned forward slightly, just enough. "Captain Reed," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Before you do that, I want to be very clear about what you're documenting." Reed stiffened. "Go on." "You're documenting that a paying passenger requested a service he confirmed, was denied without cause, and was then warned for asking why," Michael said. "You're documenting that in front of at least a dozen witnesses." Reed hesitated. Linda cut in. "That's not what happened." Michael didn't look at her. Then you'll have no problem with the review. That word again. Review. Emily felt her breath catch. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure others could hear it. She saw Reed's fingers curl slightly, then relax. He was recalculating. She could see it now. This wasn't about a meal anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Reed straightened. "I will log the interaction," he said carefully, "and we'll handle it on the ground." Michael nodded. "That's appropriate." The captain held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for something. Fear, arrogance, defiance. He found none of it, only certainty. Reed turned away. As he walked back toward the cockpit, the cabin exhaled. Conversations resumed in whispers. The man with the phone lowered it, eyes bright with interest. Richard Bowen shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence gone, his fork resting untouched on his tray. Linda remained standing. She looked at Michael as if seeing him for the first time, not as a nuisance, not as a problem, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. She leaned down, close enough that only he could hear. "You think you've won something," she said softly. "You haven't." Michael met her gaze. "Neither have you." Her lips thinned. She straightened and walked away without another word. Emily moved then. Slowly. She stepped into the galley, opened the warming drawer, and stared at the untouched tray inside. The vegetarian meal sat there, sealed, exactly where it had been the entire time. Her hands trembled. She thought about her training, about the oath they all took to follow procedure, about the line she had already crossed when she spoke up. She thought about her father, a machinist who had taught her that doing the right thing often cost more up front. She closed the drawer. For now. Michael leaned back and closed his eyes. The cabin lights hummed softly overhead. The plane cut through the sky, steady and relentless. He could feel the shift now, the balance tipping. The room had changed, not because of power, because of witnesses. He knew what came next. Not tonight, not mid-air, but soon. On the ground, in rooms where silence had been mistaken for consent for far too long. This was only the fourth movement. The real reckoning hadn't even begun. The cabin settled into an uneasy rhythm after that. Trays were cleared with exaggerated care. Voices dropped to murmurs. The plane cruised on, smooth and indifferent, while the human drama inside it tightened like a drawn wire. Linda Walsh retreated to the forward galley and stayed there, arms folded, eyes tracking every movement. She spoke quietly into the interphone again, then stopped, listening. Her jaw clenched. Whatever answer she had expected did not come. She glanced toward the cockpit door, then away, as if reconsidering a door she no longer felt welcome to open. Michael Carter sat with his eyes closed, but he wasn't resting. His mind moved in deliberate steps. He replayed the exchange, not to nurse it, but to map it. Who spoke, who watched, who stayed silent, who flinched. He felt the plane's vibration through the seat, a constant reminder of momentum. He liked momentum. Momentum meant inevitability. Across the aisle, Richard Bowen shifted again. His glass was empty now. He set it down too hard, the base clicking against the tray. He glanced toward Linda, waiting for another refill that did not come. When none arrived, he looked at Michael, irritation flickering across his face like a bad signal. "Some people just like causing scenes," Richard muttered, not quite under his breath. Michael opened his eyes and turned his head. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at Richard, long enough for the man to feel seen. "Some people confuse silence with consent," Michael said. Richard scoffed and turned back toward the window, cheeks flushed. The older man behind Michael leaned forward slightly.
"That was well said," he murmured, nodding once.
Michael inclined his head in acknowledgement. Nothing more. In the galley, Emily Brooks stood perfectly still, hands resting on the counter. The silence pressed in on her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat. She had flown hundreds of legs. She had handled medical emergencies, unruly passengers, even a diversion once. None of that felt like this. This felt like standing at the edge of something that would remember her. She glanced at the service tablet again. The untouched meal order glowed on the screen, a small green rectangle that might as well have been a warning light. She thought about the log Captain Reed had mentioned, about how entries became records, about how records became evidence. Linda's voice cut in low and sharp. "Emily?" Emily turned. "Get me the incident form," Linda said. "I want it started." Emily hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Long enough. Linda's eyes narrowed. "Now." Emily nodded and reached for the form, her fingers clumsy. She carried it toward the forward jump seat, passing Michael's row. He felt her presence again and opened his eyes as she moved by. She didn't look at him this time. She couldn't. Michael watched her shoulders as she walked. Tense. Heavy. The posture of someone carrying a weight that wasn't hers. Linda sat, pen poised, filling out the form with practiced strokes. She wrote quickly, confidently. This wasn't her first report. It was a language she spoke fluently. Her version of events flowed onto the page, neat and decisive. She didn't look up when she finished. "Captain will review it after landing," she said to no one in particular. Michael reached into his bag again. This time, he pulled out his phone and unlocked it. The screen illuminated his face. He scrolled past missed calls, past a calendar blocked solid for weeks ahead, until he reached a draft message. He read it once, then again. Emily noticed. Her breath caught as she watched him type, calm and unhurried, thumbs moving with precision. She wondered who he was writing to. A lawyer, a family member, someone who mattered. Linda noticed too. She stood abruptly and walked toward Michael, stopping just short of his seat. "Sir," she said, her voice clipped, "I need you to put your phone away." Michael looked up. "Why?" "Because continued documentation during an active situation can be construed as provocation." Michael considered that. "Is that a policy?" he asked, "or a preference?" Linda's mouth tightened. "It's a directive." "From whom?" Linda leaned closer, lowering her voice. "From me?" Michael met her gaze. The air between them felt thin, charged. "I'm allowed to take notes," he said calmly. "I'm allowed to contact counsel. I'm allowed to protect myself." Linda straightened. "This conversation is over." Michael nodded. "It has been for a while." She turned sharply and walked back to the galley, heels striking harder now. The sound echoed. The older woman behind Michael shook her head slowly. "Unbelievable," she said again, louder than before. A few passengers nodded. Someone across the aisle whispered, "This is going to be a problem." Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker once more, careful and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent in approximately 30 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." 30 minutes. Michael locked his phone and slipped it back into his bag. He folded his hands and stared forward, eyes steady. He felt no rush, no anxiety. The clock was finally moving in his direction. Linda stood rigid near the galley, her confidence fraying at the edges. She glanced at the cockpit door again, then at the passengers watching her openly now. The balance of the room had shifted. She could feel it. Authority without trust always did. Emily watched it all, her chest tight, a decision forming slowly, painfully. She thought about the instant from Linda had filled out, about the empty box marked crew remarks, about the untouched meal still logged in the system. She took a step forward, then another. She stopped beside Michael's row, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir," she said, "for what it's worth, I saw the order. It was there." Michael looked up at her. Really looked this time. He saw fear, resolve, something raw and honest. "Thank you," he said quietly. Linda spun around. Emily. Emily didn't move. The cabin held its breath. Michael leaned back, eyes forward again. He felt the shift settle into place, solid now. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a record, a room full of witnesses, a system caught mid-motion. The descent would begin soon. And on the ground, stories would be told. The wheels didn't touch the runway yet, but everyone could feel the approach. The cabin angle shifted slightly, a gentle downward pressure that made ears pop and stomachs tighten. Outside the windows, the clouds thinned, breaking into grey layers streaked with light. The ground was getting closer. So were consequences. Captain Reed made one final pass through the cabin before landing. Not the casual walk of routine, but the measured steps of a man aware that every movement was being watched. He stopped briefly near the older couple, nodded once, then continued. When he reached Michael's row, he paused. "Sir," Reed said quietly, keeping his voice neutral, "we'll be on the ground shortly. Ground operations will address any concerns at the gate." Michael met his eyes. "I appreciate that," he replied. No challenge, no warmth, just acknowledgement. Reed hesitated, then added, "For the record, I will be filing my own report." That was new. Michael studied him for a beat, then nodded. "That's the right call." Reed moved on, his shoulders slightly less rigid than before. Linda Walsh remained near the forward jump seat, strapped in, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes flicked toward Emily, then away. The young attendant stood rigid near the galley, buckled in as instructed, heart hammering so hard she could barely hear the engines. She had crossed a line. She knew it. What she didn't know was where she would land when everything stopped moving. Richard Bowen sat stiffly, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The confidence he had boarded with had evaporated somewhere over the Midwest. He avoided looking at Michael now, avoided looking at anyone, staring instead at the seatback screen like it might offer guidance. It didn't. The plane descended through a band of turbulence, sharper this time. A few passengers gasped. The older woman reached for her husband's hand. He squeezed back, steady. The cabin lights flickered briefly, then held. Michael closed his eyes. He felt the familiar mix of anticipation and restraint. He had lived long enough to know that moments like this were never as simple as people wanted them to be. There would be no single sentence that fixed everything, no dramatic gesture that erased history. What there would be was process, exposure, and choices made in full view. The landing gear dropped with a heavy thud, vibrating through the floor. The sound traveled the length of the plane like a signal. We are committed now. Linda's lips moved silently as she stared straight ahead. Whether she was rehearsing explanations or prayers, no one could tell. The wheels hit the runway hard, a solid impact that jolted the cabin. A few people applauded out of habit. Most didn't. The plane slowed, roaring deceleration pressing bodies into seats. Then, gradually, it rolled, turning off the runway and taxiing toward the terminal. The seatbelt sign remained lit. Michael opened his eyes and glanced at his watch, not checking the time, measuring it. Emily swallowed, her mouth dry. She could see the terminal through the forward windows now. Vehicles, personnel, movement, normal life continuing, unaware of what this aircraft carried inside it. The plane came to a stop. The engines wound down, their roar fading into a low hum. Silence followed, thick, expectant. Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker, steady but different now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Ground personnel will be boarding shortly. That last sentence wasn't standard. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Heads turned toward the front. Linda stiffened. The forward door opened with a mechanical hiss. Cool air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of rain and concrete. Two men in dark jackets stepped aboard, followed by a woman in a charcoal suit carrying a slim tablet. They moved with purpose, eyes scanning, posture unmistakably official. Michael stood. Not abruptly, not defiantly, just rose to his full height, calm and deliberate. Linda turned in her seat, eyes widening. "Sir, you need to remain seated," she snapped, the old authority flaring. The woman in the charcoal suit spoke before Michael could respond. Her voice was clear, practiced. "Mr. Carter?" Michael nodded once. "Yes." The name landed like a dropped plate. Linda froze. Richard Bowen's head snapped up, his face drained of color. The older couple leaned forward, eyes wide. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The woman extended a hand. "I'm Allison Green, legal counsel for Carter Logistics Group. Thank you for your patience." Michael shook her hand briefly. "Appreciate you coming quickly." Linda stared at them, her mouth opening, then closing again. "This is highly inappropriate," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just board a plane and—" "Ms. Walsh," Allison said calmly, turning to her, "please remain seated. This will only take a moment." Linda's authority evaporated in that instant. She sank back, hands trembling now, the first visible crack in her armor. Captain Reed emerged from the cockpit, eyes moving between Michael and the newcomers. "What's going on?" he asked, carefully. Allison met his gaze. "Captain Reed, thank you for your cooperation during the flight. We'll need a brief statement from you and your crew regarding an onboard service incident." Reed nodded slowly. "Understood." Michael turned to the cabin then, not raising his voice, not performing, just speaking. "I want to thank everyone for their patience," he said. "I know this was uncomfortable to witness. Accountability usually is." No one spoke, but no one looked away either. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. She blinked them back, standing straighter. Michael looked at her, just for a second. A nod, small, affirming. Linda watched it happen, something collapsing inside her chest. She saw the looks now. Not judgment, recognition. She understood, finally, that this wasn't about a meal. It never had been. Allison gestured toward the aisle. "We'll begin with the crew," she said. The cabin held its breath as the first steps were taken, not toward the exit, but toward a reckoning that would not be rushed, not be hidden, and not be undone. This was the sixth movement. The ground was finally beneath them, and the story was no longer contained by the sky. The aisle became a corridor of truth. The two men in dark jackets stepped aside as Allison Green moved forward, tablet tucked under her arm, eyes calm, assessing. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Everything she required was already in the room. Witnesses, records, a system mid-exposure. "Captain Reed," she said, her tone professional, neutral. "When you're ready." Reed nodded once. He looked older now, not weaker, just stripped of the insulation authority often provides. He gestured toward the forward galley. "We can speak there." Linda Walsh stood abruptly. "I want my union rep present," she said, voice sharp, reflexive. "This is disciplinary." Allison didn't argue. "Of course. Your request is noted." Your union has already been notified. For now, this is a fact-finding process. Linda's confidence wavered. Already notified, she repeated. Michael said nothing. He didn't need to. The timing spoke for itself. Passengers remained seated, eyes following every movement. No one reached for overhead bins. No one stood. This wasn't disembarkation. This was theater without a script, and everyone knew better than to interrupt. Emily Brooks felt rooted to the floor near the galley, her legs heavy, her thoughts racing. Allison turned to her gently. "You're Emily Brooks?" Emily startled. "Yes." "Thank you for staying," Allison said. "We'll need your statement as well." Emily nodded, throat tight. She had expected fear. What she felt instead was relief. The kind that comes when the weight finally shifts from your chest to the ground. Richard Bowen leaned toward the aisle, trying to catch Allison's eye. "Excuse me," he said, forcing a laugh. "I don't think I need to be involved here." Allison looked at him briefly. "Mr. Bowen," she said, glancing at her tablet. "You were seated in 1 Bravo and received a reassigned meal, correct?" Richard's smile froze. "I didn't know there was an issue." "You were part of the sequence," Allison replied evenly. "That's all." Richard sank back into his seat, color draining from his face. The older woman behind Michael exhaled slowly. "About time," she whispered. Michael stood just off to the side now, no longer the center, no longer the target. He watched the room transform. People leaned back, shoulders dropped. The tension that had choked the cabin loosened, replaced by something quieter and heavier. Accountability had a sound. It sounded like silence filled with the tension. Allison turned to the crew. "Captain Reed, Ms. Walsh, and Ms. Brooks will remain on board for statements. The remainder of the crew is relieved for now." Relieved. The word landed hard. Linda stiffened. "You can't do that without..." Allison met her gaze. "This is not termination," she said. "It is administrative removal pending review. Union protections apply." Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She sat back down slowly, the fight draining from her posture, replaced by calculation. Captain Reed nodded. "Understood." He turned to Michael. For the first time, he looked at him not as a passenger, not as a problem, but as what he was. "I didn't know," Reed said quietly. Michael's voice was steady. "You weren't supposed to." Reed absorbed that, then looked away, jaw tightening. Passengers began to disembark slowly, guided around the scene by the 2 men in jackets. No one rushed. No one complained. Many glanced at Michael as they passed. Some nodded. Some looked thoughtful. A few looked ashamed. When the cabin finally emptied, the space felt larger, exposed. The absence of noise made every sound sharper. The hum of auxiliary power. The distant echo of voices from the jet bridge. The soft click of Allison's tablet as she brought up the first file. "Let's start with the order log," she said. Emily stepped forward, hands shaking as she pulled up the system. The screen glowed. Clear. Time stamped. The vegetarian meal request, confirmed. Not modified. Not cancelled. Allison angled the screen toward Linda. "Can you explain why this order was reassigned?" Linda crossed her arms. "Operational discretion." Allison raised an eyebrow. "That's not a policy." "It's judgment," Linda snapped. "You don't know what it's like managing a cabin." Michael spoke for the first time since landing. "Then explain the pattern." Allison looked at him briefly, then nodded, tapping her tablet. A list appeared. Complaints, dates, names, repeated phrases, similar incidents across years, different flights, same outcomes. Linda stared at the screen. Those were difficult passengers. Emily flinched. Captain Reed leaned closer, eyes scanning. His expression changed. Subtle. Grave.
These weren't isolated, he said.
No, Allison replied. They weren't. Linda's voice dropped. This is a witch hunt. This is a record, Allison said calmly. There's a difference. Michael watched Linda carefully now, not with anger, with recognition. He had seen this moment before. The instant someone realized the narrative they had lived inside no longer protected them. Allison turned to Emily. Miss Brooks, you indicated the meal was available? Yes, Emily said, voice trembling but clear. It was in the system. It still is. Why wasn't it served? Emily hesitated, then looked at Linda. She felt the old fear surge, then recede. I was told not to, she said. I was told to stay in my lane. Silence. Linda's shoulders sagged just slightly. Allison nodded. Thank you. She turned to Michael. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to add? Michael considered the question. He looked around the empty cabin, the seats, the aisle, the place where the system had revealed itself. Yes, he said quietly. This wasn't about me. Allison waited. It's about who gets believed when no one important is watching, Michael continued. It's about how power behaves when it thinks it's invisible. No one interrupted. Michael took a breath. I didn't come here to punish, he said. I came to see. I've seen enough. Allison closed her tablet. That concludes the preliminary review. Linda looked up sharply. What happens now? Allison met her gaze. Now, the process begins. Linda laughed softly. It sounded hollow. Process, she repeated. Michael turned toward the exit. The jet bridge stretched ahead, bright and ordinary. He paused, then looked back at Emily. You did the right thing, he said. Emily nodded, tears finally slipping free. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. Michael stepped off the plane. Behind him, the cabin remained, stripped of its illusion, waiting for what came next. The jet bridge swallowed Michael in a wash of fluorescent light and cool, recycled air. The sounds of the terminal pressed in immediately. Rolling suitcases, distant announcements, the low murmur of lives continuing, unaware that something inside the aircraft behind him had just cracked open. He didn't stop walking. Allison Green fell into step beside him, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. Michael knew the rhythm of aftermath. The silence after impact always carried more information than the collision itself. Behind them, through the open aircraft door, the process continued. Captain Reed sat at the forward jump seat, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. The uniform that had once felt like armor now felt thin. He replayed the flight in his mind, frame by frame. The choice to minimize, the choice to trust seniority over observation. None of it had felt wrong at the time. That was the most unsettling part. Linda Warse remained seated near the galley, spine rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. Her thoughts raced, not toward regret, but toward strategy. Union bylaws, seniority clauses, arbitration timelines. She had survived storms before. She told herself this was another one. But the quiet was different. There was no sympathetic chatter, no whispered reassurance. The room had turned away from her. Emily Brooks stood near the service console, hands folded, pulse finally slowing. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed inward. It steadied her. She watched Allison's team collect data, watched names and timestamps turn into something undeniable. For the first time since she'd joined the airline, she felt taller. On the jet bridge, Michael slowed. Next steps, Allison said quietly. Union notification is already complete. The crew is placed on administrative leave pending full review. Statements will be transcribed tonight. Michael nodded. And the passengers? We'll reach out, Allison replied. Voluntary statements. No pressure. He stopped walking and turned to her. Make sure they know that. Allison met his gaze. Of course. They resumed moving. Ahead, the terminal opened into a wide concourse. Michael spotted the older couple from the cabin waiting near the gate, their coats on, bags at their feet. The woman recognized him instantly. Her eyes widened. She nudged her husband. Michael approached them. Sir, the woman said, voice warm but firm. I just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't have to do that. Michael smiled faintly. Someone did. Her husband nodded. My father used to say, systems don't change because they're asked politely. They change because someone refuses to look away. Michael extended his hand. The man shook it, grip steady. Across the concourse, Richard Bowen stood off to the side, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, urgent. His earlier bravado was gone. He glanced toward Michael, then away quickly, speaking faster. Michael didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Damage control. Too late. Allison checked her tablet. Transportation is ready. Michael shook his head. I'll walk. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll meet you later. They parted. Michael moved through the terminal alone, blending into the flow of travelers. No one stared. No one pointed. He preferred it that way. The power he carried wasn't meant to be worn like a badge. It was meant to be applied, precisely, where it mattered. Back on the plane, the atmosphere shifted again. Allison's team concluded the initial data capture. That's sufficient for now, she said, sliding her tablet closed. Ms. Walsh, Captain Reed, you're free to collect your belongings. You'll be contacted within the next 24 hours. Linda stood slowly, smoothing her uniform. Her hands shook despite her effort to steady them. She looked around the cabin one last time. No one met her eyes. Captain Reed gathered his hat, hesitating before placing it on his head. He turned to Emily. You did your job, he said quietly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a defense. It was acknowledgement. Emily nodded. So did you, she replied, surprising herself. Reed considered that, then inclined his head slightly and walked off. Linda followed, heels no longer clicking with confidence, but tapping unevenly, out of rhythm. Emily remained. Allison turned to her. You'll be contacted by HR, she said gently. Union protections apply. If you need representation, we'll ensure it's available. Emily swallowed. Thank you. Allison paused. For what it's worth, you handled yourself well. Emily felt her eyes sting again. She blinked, nodded, and watched as Allison stepped onto the jet bridge, leaving the cabin behind. The aircraft sat quiet now. Empty seats, dim lights, the evidence of a conflict that had already begun to ripple outward. Emily took one last look at the galley, at the warming drawer. She opened it. The vegetarian meal sat inside, still sealed. She lifted it carefully, holding it for a moment before setting it back. Some things didn't need to be fixed anymore. They needed to be remembered. Outside, Michael exited the terminal into the damp Seattle air. The sky hung low and gray, a fine mist settling on his jacket. He breathed deeply, letting the cold clear his lungs. He didn't feel victorious. He felt resolved. This was one flight, one crew, one exposure. There would be meetings, pushback, editorials, lawyers, long nights. He welcomed them. Change that came easily never lasted. Michael adjusted the strap of his bag and stepped forward into the crowd, already thinking about the next room, the next system, the next moment when silence would need to be challenged again. The plane behind him would fly again, but it would not fly the same way.
The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like old coffee and polished wood. The kind of room built to impress and intimidate at the same time.
Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but the blinds were half drawn, muting the light, trapping the people inside with their own reflections. Michael Carter stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair he had not yet claimed. He had not changed clothes, same jacket, same shoes, same quiet presence. The room noticed. Around the table sat the interim leadership of Eagle Horizon Airlines, operations, HR, legal, union observers, a representative from the Pilots Association, another from the Flight Attendants Union. No one spoke yet. They were waiting for the shape of the meeting to reveal itself. Alison Green sat to Michael's right, tablet open, screen dark. She was not here to argue. She was here to record. Michael looked around the room slowly, deliberately, meeting eyes one by one. Some looked back, some didn't. A few already knew what this meeting meant. Others still believed in buffers, in procedures, in delay. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Michael said. His voice was calm, even, but it carried easily. The room leaned toward it. "This is not a disciplinary hearing, not yet. This is a reckoning." A chair shifted. Someone cleared their throat. "Earlier today," Michael continued, "I flew one of your aircraft as a paying passenger. I did not announce myself. I did not request special handling. I observed." He paused, let the word land. "What I observed was not an isolated incident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, reinforced by silence, protected by habit." The head of HR, a woman in her early 50s with carefully neutral posture, spoke cautiously. "We understand there was a service issue on the flight. We are reviewing—" "No," Michael said, gently but firmly. "There was a systems issue. Service was just where it surfaced." The union representative leaned forward. "With respect," he said, "we need to be clear. Any personnel actions must follow contract." "They will," Michael replied. "Every clause, every safeguard. This is not about punishment. It's about accountability." Alison tapped her tablet once. The screen lit up. Graphs, timelines, names redacted. Data filling the wall monitor at the far end of the room. "These are customer complaints logged over the past 5 years," Alison said. "Filtered for unresolved or administratively closed cases involving premium cabin service." A low murmur spread. Michael didn't look at the screen. He watched the faces instead. "Notice the repetition," he said. "Same routes, same crews, same language in the write-ups. Difficult passenger, misunderstanding, no further action." The Pilots Association rep frowned. "Captain Reed has a clean flight record." "So did every captain before their first incident," Michael replied. "This is not about flying skill. It's about judgment." Silence again. He let it stretch. "Here's what's going to happen," Michael said. "Effective immediately, the entire crew of today's flight is placed on administrative leave pending independent review. That includes leadership positions. This is not termination. This is containment." The word landed heavy. "Second," he continued, "all customer complaint suppression practices are frozen. No deletions, no reclassification without dual authorization. Audit access is granted to an external firm, chosen by my office." The HR head stiffened. "That will create exposure." "It will create truth," Michael replied. "Exposure already exists. It's just been hidden." A union observer spoke up. "What about Emily Brooks?" Michael turned toward her. "She stays, fully protected. Union representation offered. No retaliation, implicit or explicit. Any violation of that will be treated as gross misconduct." Alison nodded, recording. Michael took a breath. The room felt smaller now, hotter. Third, he said, this airline will no longer operate on deference to appearance.
That includes passengers. That includes staff.
Training protocols will be rewritten, not as a branding exercise, as a moral one. Someone scoffed softly. Michael's gaze snapped to the sound. The man straightened. I've spent my career watching systems rot quietly, Michael said. They don't collapse because of villains. They collapse because of professionals who convince themselves it's not their job to intervene. No one spoke. This company will change, Michael continued. Not because I own it, because people deserve it. Customers, staff, crews, especially the ones who learned to keep their heads down. He straightened, finally pulling out the chair at the head of the table and sitting. The act was simple, final. If that makes this uncomfortable, he said, good. Comfort was the problem. The meeting ended without applause, without arguments. People gathered their papers slowly, avoiding eye contact, minds racing ahead to consequences they could no longer outrun. Hours later, as evening fell and the city lights flickered on, Emily Brooks sat alone in her apartment, still in uniform. Her phone buzzed once. A message. HR. Formal language. Administrative notice. Protected status confirmed. Follow-up scheduled. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down and pressed her palms to her face. She laughed once, soft, disbelieving, then cried. Across town, Linda Walsh sat at her kitchen table, uniform folded neatly beside her. Her phone lay face down, union emails unread. She stared at the wall, replaying the moment on the plane when the room had turned, when authority stopped working, when the system she had trusted had not protected her. For the first time in decades, she felt something she could not categorize. Uncertainty. Michael Carter stood in his hotel room, jacket draped over a chair, city noise muffled by thick glass. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it slowly. His phone buzzed with messages. Board members, advisors, media inquiries. He ignored them. He looked out at the city, lights stretching into the distance like a living grid, and felt the weight of what he had set in motion. Not satisfaction. Responsibility. This was the 9th movement. The fallout. And it had only just begun. 6 months later, the airport no longer felt the same, even though the walls were unchanged and the gates still hummed with the same mechanical patience they always had. Michael Carter stood just beyond the security line, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the morning flow of travelers move past him like a river that had finally learned a new course. There were fewer sharp voices now, fewer rigid postures, more eyes meeting other eyes, if only for a second. Change never announced itself loudly. It showed up in details. The airline's logo glowed above the terminal entrance, polished, familiar, but the people beneath it carried a different weight. Training had been rewritten from the ground up, not the kind that lived in binders no one opened, but the kind that forced uncomfortable conversations in rooms where silence used to be rewarded. Complaint logs were no longer buried. They were reviewed weekly, publicly, with union observers present. It slowed things down. It frustrated executives who preferred efficiency over integrity. Michael accepted the cost without hesitation. Speed had built the problem. Patience would dismantle it. Emily Brooks walked through the terminal with her ID badge clipped neatly to her blazer, no longer tucked away, no longer something she half hid. Her role had changed, not in title alone, but in gravity. She now trained crews on decision-making under pressure, on how bias hid inside routine, on how authority without reflection became cruelty without intent. She still flew occasionally. She insisted on it. She needed to remember the aisle, the galley, the quiet moments when choices were made without witnesses. On one of those flights, she paused beside an elderly man struggling with an overhead bag. A younger attendant moved to help before Emily could speak, gentle, efficient, respectful. Emily watched without interrupting. She smiled once, small and private. Progress didn't require applause. It required consistency. Captain Reed had not returned to the cockpit. After the investigation, he chose early retirement, a decision he framed publicly as personal. In private, he sent Michael a letter. No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement. Michael kept it in a drawer, unread most days, but he never threw it away. Accountability wasn't about erasure. It was about memory. Linda Walsh's arbitration dragged on longer than anyone expected. The union defended her right to due process. The airline honored it fully. The outcome wasn't dramatic. It rarely was. She lost her position. She kept part of her pension. She never admitted fault publicly, but she never denied the record either. When the decision was finalized, there were no headlines, just a quiet update in an internal bulletin that few read twice. Michael preferred it that way. Justice did not need a spotlight to be real. The media cycle moved on, as it always did. New outrages replaced old ones. But inside the company, something fundamental had shifted. Meetings felt different. People spoke earlier, disagreed openly. Junior staff challenged senior ones without fear of being labeled difficult. It slowed consensus. It strengthened outcomes. Michael sat in the observation lounge overlooking the runway, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He watched a plane taxi into position, sunlight flashing briefly across its fuselage. He thought about the first flight he had taken alone at 19, the way he had memorized exit rows and safety cards, because preparation had been the only control he trusted back then. He thought about the years spent learning that control was not power, and power was not authority. Authority came from accountability. A young man in a maintenance uniform sat a few seats away, nervously tapping his foot. After a moment, he glanced at Michael, hesitated, then spoke. "Sir," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, things are different now." Michael turned toward him. "Better," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. The man nodded. "Yeah, harder sometimes, but better." Michael smiled. "Harder is honest." The announcement for boarding echoed softly through the lounge. People stood, gathered bags, adjusted jackets. Michael remained seated for a moment longer, letting the sound wash over him. He did not feel finished. He felt engaged. That was the difference. When he finally rose and joined the line, no one stepped aside. No one recognized him. That, too, was part of the design. He moved forward at the same pace as everyone else, scanned his pass, and stepped into the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the air carried the familiar scent of metal and recycled calm. A flight attendant met his eyes and nodded, not deferential, not dismissive, just professional. Michael returned the nod and walked to his seat. He sat down, placed his bag beneath the seat in front of him, and folded his hands. The engines would roar soon. The sky would open. People would watch one another in small, unremarkable ways that determined far more than policies ever could. Michael closed his eyes as the door sealed shut, not in rest, but in acknowledgement of motion. This was how change traveled. Quietly, relentlessly, one flight at a time. If this story resonated with you, like, subscribe, comment. Respect matters now.